And I'm delighted to welcome to the Googleplex author, physician, doctor of soul, and a modern-day guru of human empowerment, Dr. Deepak Chopra. Dr. Chopra began his life as a physician, a doctor of the body, but very soon he realized that his true calling was in being a doctor of the spirit. In fact, his versatility is clear from the fact that he's a member of the American College of Physicians, he's a professor at the Kellogg School of Management, and a scientist at the Gallup organization. And as soon as he realized this shift in how he wanted to touch people, he started speaking and writing about it, and so prolific that he's written 55 books, 18 of them on the New York Times bestseller list, on a variety of topics on mind, body, spirituality, health, human empowerment. And along the way, and check this out when you get your phones, he's created an Android app called Authentic Yoga, which you should all give it a try. And here to speak about his latest book, The Soul of Leadership, which you should all have copies for, I want you to join me in giving a warm namaste to Deepak Chopra, somebody Time magazine called one of the top 100 heroes and icons of the century, the poet, prophet of alternate medicine. Please join me with a warm namaste to Dr. Deepak Chopra.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi. So thank you very much for having me, and I have enjoyed the last 1 hour walking around this campus, being exposed to the spirit of this place, and I can authentically say that Google has a soul. There are a lot of places that have no soul whatsoever. So very happy to be here. How many of you actually ever think about the soul? How many of you don't think there is such a thing? Good. Just 2? Okay. Let me start with a little story, and then we'll get into, addressing the topic of today. The story goes back when I was about 7 years of age in India. My father was an army doctor. My little brother at that time was about 4 years of age. My mother was the best mother in the world. And we read in the newspapers, we were living in a small town, then small town, in the center of India called Jabalpur. And the newspaper said that Mr. Nehru, who was the first Prime Minister of India and the heir to Mahatma Gandhi, was coming to our little town. This, remember, about 15 years post-independence, to open an automobile factory. Nehru was a great hero for Indians at that time, a visionary, a statesman, as I said, the spiritual heir to Mahatma Gandhi. So there was a lot of excitement, and in our family there was only one discussion over breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And that was what was the color of the sari my mother would wear for the occasion. And my father would, of course, tease her and say that no one was going to notice the color of a sari. So on the day Mr. Nehru arrived, my mother in a beautiful pink sari, and my father in his army uniform with his World War II medals, my little brother, then 4, now the dean of Harvard Medical School, and me, we were on the streets at 4 o'clock in the morning before the sun rose. And by about 6:37, there were millions of people on the street. And in India, when I say millions, it means millions, okay? It doesn't mean thousands or tens of thousands, it means millions. Seething masses of humanity. Wherever you could see, there were people. People on treetops, people hanging by window ledges, people on buses, people on each other's shoulders, rambunctious, rowdy, and really very noisy. And about 9 o'clock, Mr. Nehru's motorcade came by our street. He was standing in a jeep, wearing a white Nehru jacket, as we now call it. This is a Nehru jacket. And he had a rose, a red rose in his lapel, which was his signature, his trademark. And there was a jeep in the front, and there was a jeep in the back, a motorcycle or two. Pretty simple. And it slowly turned the corner and came by us. And as it went by us, Mr. Nehru seemed to turn around, look at my mother, and he took his rose out and he threw it at her. And the crowd gasped and stepped back almost, except for my mother, who kind of stepped forward like a queen, picked up the rose, held it up to great applause, and looked at my father and said, "Daddy, what did I tell you?" Okay. And now let's go home. So in that moment, as a 7-year-old, I kind of thought, boy, she's a great leader. You know, the real leader in the family. Although my father wore the medals and all that. We went home, and she emptied one room, completely took away all the furniture except for one table. And on the table, she put a vase and the rose. And for the next 3 weeks, people came to our house to look at the rose. It was quite something. They would come in India, you know, when you go to a house of veneration or a sacred place, you take off your shoes, etc. So they would come and take their shoes off and tiptoe into this room in silence, and they would just look at the rose. After 3 weeks, the rose started to fade, and my mother had a party. She invited all her friends, and at the end of the party, everybody got a faded rose petal. And you should have seen the attitude when they accepted that. It was like they were getting a diamond or a jewel. So afterwards, we asked our mother, my brother and I, what was so special about those rose petals? And she said something, you know, some things you remember forever, that became the genesis of this course that I now teach at the Kellogg School of Management, called The Soul of Leadership. She said those rose petals was symbolic of the soul of India. And at that time, I didn't really understand what that meant, the soul of a country. As I mentioned to you, when I came here, I felt that Google has a soul. When I go to Detroit, I don't feel that. You know, there's something very special when you think of soul, and I'll tell you what that means. But my mother explained that the leaders, in a sense, are the symbolic soul of a group consciousness, that they represent the dreams and the creativity and the longings and the aspirations and the intentions of a collective consciousness. And that collective consciousness could be a small unit, a family. It could be a company, business. It could be a community. It could be a country. It could be a political party. It could be the whole world. But the leader somehow embodies the collective dream. And so when somebody like a Martin Luther King Jr. says, "I have a dream," obviously he's not speaking of a personal dream alone. It's the dream of a great zeitgeist, of an emerging longing for transition, for transformation, for change, for movement into a higher consciousness. So that kind of stayed with me as a theme, you know, that the soul represents a deep aspect of our core consciousness. Later, I went on to study medicine, and like anyone else, being programmed, indoctrinated into a completely materialistic worldview, I really became, like most of my colleagues, a great technician who knew everything about the human body and not necessarily a healer, because I knew nothing about the other aspects of human consciousness. So I used to wonder why you could have two groups of patients or two patients who had the same illness, the same treatment, the same physician, and yet have completely different outcomes. That's well known in medicine. So even though we know so much about biological systems as organisms that follow the laws of chemistry and physics and mathematics, if you will, there's something very unpredictable about human biology and its response to illness. So later, I started to train in a field called endocrinology. For those of you who may not be familiar with that, it's the study of hormones, and then transferred to the field of neuroendocrinology, which is brain chemistry. And when I was in my training, this was a very interesting time, because for the first time as biologists, we were addressing the unsolved mystery of consciousness. You know, we're all conscious beings. We're sitting here listening to each other. Our consciousness is responsible for our perception and for our thinking and for our emotions and our thoughts and our feelings and our longings and aspirations, our memories. And nobody as yet has figured out the mechanics of consciousness. It's the one totally unsolved mystery in biology. When I was in medical school, we had a very simple notion of consciousness. The human brain, or the brain, produces consciousness. Just like your gallbladder produces bile, and your pancreas produces pancreatic juice, and your stomach makes acid, your brain makes thoughts. So if you have thoughts and feelings and emotions and imagination, it's the dance of molecules. But actually, the more we understand about the human brain, or the brain in general, the deeper the mystery of consciousness gets. For example, your brain is actually more or less like a network of synaptic layers of tracks that have firings, electrical firings. So right now, if I asked you to imagine a sunset, can you see one? But there's no picture of a sunset in your brain. If I go to your brain, all I'll see is some electricity, that's all. Or if I ask you to imagine a sound, or ask you to remember something, I won't see any images or sounds or textures in the brain. All we see is neural networks that fire electricity. Similarly, we have no idea what causes perception. For example, when you see this color, what color is this? Red, right? And yet there's no red beam of light coming from here to your eyes. Some invisible electromagnetic radiation with a particular frequency that has no color. It hits your retina. It causes generation of electricity, which goes to your brain. And in your brain, there's no red color, and you see red. So where is the red? This in science, in biology, is called the hard problem of consciousness. There's a soft problem which has been solved, which means for every mental activity, there is a corresponding neural correlate. So if I tell you to imagine a sunset, I'll see which part of the brain acts up. There's no part of the brain that does not represent some kind of mental activity. But how we experience sound, touch, sight, taste, and smell, how we imagine, how we think, what is the mechanics of insight or intuition or creativity, no one has figured it out. a great English scientist by the name of Sir Arthur Eddington. He said the best explanation is that something unknown is doing we don't know what. We have no idea of the origins of consciousness. The materialistic interpretation is not valid anymore. There are scientists like Sir Roger Penrose, who was the thesis advisor of Stephen Hawking, who suggest that consciousness is actually a fundamental activity of the universe at Planck scale space-time geometry. Planck scale meaning 10 to the power of minus 33 centimeters, or 25 times smaller in order in magnitude than an atom. So if you go smaller, smaller, smaller to Planck scales and to what you might call the basement of the universe, everything disappears. You end up with a nothingness, a void. And so the big question is, what is this emptiness from where the whole universe is constantly arising and into which it is constantly subsiding? So people like Penrose and many others, in fact, we have a conference coming up called Sages and Scientists at our center in another 10 days, where we're bringing together some of the greatest scientists of the world to talk about the mystery of consciousness. But there's a number of scientists who are suggesting that at Planck scale space-time geometry, at that level, everything disappears. Matter, energy, space-time, the world of objects, and what you get is a field of possibilities which has the fundamental building blocks of the material universe as possibility. Spin, charge, space-time, gravity, but only as possibility, not as things themselves. And at that level, there is also Platonic truth, which is things like mathematical truth and musical truth and truth, goodness, beauty, harmony, evolution. And therefore, the fundamental levels of the cosmos contain the building blocks both of matter and of mind. And that our personal consciousness is a little drop in the ocean of consciousness. So, you know, Sufi mystics like Rumi say, you're not just a drop in the ocean, you're the ocean in the drop. So this is where science is taking us right now. That our consciousness, that part of us that manifests as our mind and as our body, that projects itself as the body, and then the environment is actually non-local. Non-local means it does not exist in space-time. That it exists as a transcendent entity which is outside of space-time. So right now, as you're listening to me, try this. As you're listening to me, turn your attention to the listener. So as you're listening to me, just become aware of who's listening. And if you feel some kind of awareness, the subject of experience, that's your soul. It's not your mind, which might be saying, I wish I'd gone to the bathroom before the lecture, or whatever else. There's a consciousness, a presence, an awareness in which thoughts come and go, in which perceptions come and go, in which ideas come and go, in which the molecules of your body come and go. And so the great wisdom traditions of the world, particularly in the East, have said, hold on to that presence. It's the only part of you that's real. Because everything else is an impermanent pattern of behavior of that consciousness. So when you were a baby, that consciousness was there. It's there now. It was there when you were a teenager. It'll be there when you're an old person. And because it's transcendent and does not exist in space-time, it's eternal. And it's part of an impersonal field of awareness, which is a field of possibilities, which is proliferating with uncertainty because the laws of nature disappear here, which is a field of correlation, infinite harmony. You know, it's part of the universe. That's why we call it universe, one song, okay, one symphony. It's a field of intentionality. It's a field of creativity. That's the worldview I hold personally, And that's the basis of everything I do, whether it's medicine or teaching business school or teaching people the principles behind intuition and creativity and all of that. That your brain is actually a place that represents events that happen in consciousness. And that consciousness is the source of all the things that make us very different in that from other animals, in that we have the capacity for self-awareness. We ask ourselves questions like, who am I? Where did I come from? Do I have a soul? Does God exist? The fact that we have insight and intuition and imagination and creativity and freedom of will, these are not attributes of neural networks, which are basically just networks. They're neurons, they're physical things, and networks don't experience time or the past or the future or have aspirations and longings. Now, having said that, every event that you experience in consciousness does have a representation in the brain. So in the next 5 minutes, I'm going to make you all experts on neuroscience. So if this was your brain, let's say, you can make a fist. The wrist represents the spinal cord, okay? This part of the thumb, the base of the thumb here, represents something called the reptilian brain. The limbic brain is inside, but the reptilian brain is also called the midbrain. It evolved around 300 million years ago. So if you are close to a reptile and you make a sudden noise or a sudden movement, the reptile has something called a startle response. If you're very close, it'll attack you. If you're a little further away, it'll slither away. And this has become, over evolutionary time, it has become what is called the fight or flight response, which means when an animal is threatened, it either attacks or it runs. So when I was in medical school, the way we remembered the functions of the reptilian brain, because it has other functions as well, were the 4 Fs: feeding, fighting, fleeing, and reproduction. Okay? So this is, and it's all totally automatic. There's no thinking involved. It's reflexive. Now, if you open your fist up like this, then you see where my thumb is here. This inside of the brain is called the limbic brain, which is our emotional brain. And when we feel connected, then the limbic system is functioning well. We experience love and compassion, and we experience goodness, we experience kindness, we experience joy, we have equanimity or peace of mind. And you can see that when you're having those experiences, the limbic brain actually is firing very coherently. When you feel disconnected, or you feel fearful, or you feel threatened, then the limbic brain gets totally discoherent, and you experience things like hostility, resentments, anger, fear, shame, guilt, depression. The limbic system is not working properly. Okay, this is 100 million years old. The first one is 300 million years old. And then you have this huge part, this is the cortical brain, okay, which is only 4 million years old in evolution. So it's brand new, this part of our brain. And this part of our brain, which as I said is 4 million years old, and it grew explosively in the last 15,000 years. First with oral language, which is using noises to communicate with each other, and then with written language, which is only 5,000 years old, which means using squiggles to communicate with each other. And now with the internet, which is since 1995 commercially, only 15 years old, we are seeing a very rapid, explosive growth of this part of the brain. In fact, children who play with video games and are good at digital technology, you can see that the neural networks are growing so fast that it would have taken 100 years of evolution to do that in a few months. So we are now, through technology, literally, seeing the explosive growth of this part of our brain, the cortical brain, which has self-awareness and can actually override the midbrain and can heal the limbic brain so that one feels positive emotions. And this is giving us great insight into where the future of self-repair systems, because all biological systems know how to heal them, self-repair, self-evolve, self-regulate. So since I have this opportunity and I don't want to miss it, I'm going to just show you a couple of things. I'm going to take you through, can I do that? Take you through a little bit of meditative experience. So put your feet on the ground with your feet firmly planted. Sit relatively erect. Just 5 minutes and I'll show you the power of consciousness, okay? And take your hands and open them up and put them in your lap like that, and close your eyes and bring your awareness first into your heart, which is right in the center of your chest, and for a minute or so experience gratitude, which is think of all the things for which you are grateful for. Your family, your friends, etc. All the things that you would count as your blessings. Now think of people in your life that you feel great love for. Okay, now leave all that and just observe your breath. Just observe it as it goes in and out. And notice that as you observe it, it spontaneously starts to slow down. And now you can mentally tell your breath to slow down even more. Slow down. Now bring your awareness into your heart and see if you can listen to your heartbeat. See if you can sense your heartbeat either as a sound or a sensation. Just focus and see if you can sense your heartbeat as a sound or a sensation. And now move your awareness from your heart into your open hands, into your fingertips, and see if you can bring your heartbeat into your hands. Can you feel the throbbing of your heartbeat in your hands? Increase the temperature of your hands. See if you can feel some warmth or tingling or throbbing in your fingers. Now bring your awareness into your face and see if you can transfer your heartbeat to your face and increase blood flow in your face. Feel some warmth in your cheeks. And now just scan your total body quickly. So go over the limbs, the legs, the feet, the shoulders, the knees, the hips, the spine, the neck. Now bring your awareness into your abdomen, into your stomach, intestines. Into your lungs as they expand and contract, and back into your heart. Relax into your body. And take a minute to open your eyes. So I took all of 5 minutes really, no more than 5 minutes, to take you through a series of mental events where you put your attention and had a certain intention. How many people could feel that they could hear their heartbeat? How many people could transfer it to their hands? When you did that, you altered blood flow and circulation, and you actually lowered your blood pressure by 10 to 15 points. 80% of drugs are given for that range of hypertension. How many people could move the blood into their cheeks against gravity through intention? Okay, so all I'm saying is within 5 minutes, you can use your conscious mind to override your midbrain, which means this part, which is the fight-flight response, totally. You can activate the limbic brain just by thinking of love, compassion, kindness, joy, or people in your life. And you can literally rewire your whole brain through practice. And this is just 5 minutes of instruction. This is a new field in science. It's called neuroplasticity. And the operating phrase is neurons that fire together, wire together. So, great yogis in India have been doing this for thousands of years, where they can change their body temperature just with the flicker of an intention, lower their heart rate, change body circulation, lower blood pressure, change autonomic responses. And today we are finding out so much about this part of our brain. This is cortical brain, which is something called there's this little island there called the insula, which is like a hub, where, like, say, a hub, an airport terminal like Chicago, where all the flights come and go. So the insula is like a hub, and it sends messages to all the different parts of the brain and the body and receives messages, okay? And everything functions as an integrated whole, and you can learn to actually influence that, to self-regulate that. So you're no longer victimized by the midbrain into reactive responses. You just stop, you watch the impulse, and you let it go. You activate limbic brain, you activate intuition by asking questions, you activate creativity by incubating and gathering information. So for the first time, we have a deep understanding. We can watch what's happening in the brain through PET scans and CAT scans. And with the newer technologies, like this, for example, which I have in my pocket, which tells me how many calories I'm expending, how much energy I'm using, how long I sleep at night. You can wear headbands to monitor your brainwaves from a distance. And this morning I was at Cisco, and I spoke to 100 countries, 100 leaders, over 150 leaders in over 100 countries, and through bioregulation and biofeedback, training them to rewire their brain for higher consciousness. It's no longer mystical. It's science. The two operating new discoveries in science, one is neuroplasticity, that just by changing your patterns of inner experience, you can rewire your brain. And the other is what is called gene regulation. After I finished at Cisco this morning, I went to meet Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, who got the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2009, to talk about the fact that our so-called genes are not fixed entities. The human genome has you have about 23,000 genes. There are some worms that have more genes, and 65% of your genes are the same as a banana. So, it's not our genes that make us who we are. It's how we think, how we behave, how we consciously learn to live our lives. You can change or upregulate 500 genes that code for diseases like heart disease, certain types of cancer, autoimmune illnesses. Gene regulation and neuroplasticity are giving us a new idea of the human body. It's not a structure, it's a process. There are no structures in the universe. Everything is a process, and every process occurs in the field of consciousness. So based on that, I created this course for leaders, which is based on inner work. And here's my first slide, which is that your consciousness, which is literally your soul, if you will, your non-local self, is simultaneously manifesting as your moods, emotions, environmental situations, behavior, biology, social interactions, personal relationships, perception, and even the environment and nature's forces, because nature's forces outside you and nature's forces inside you are the same. The same electrical storms that create lightning in the clouds, also the same electrical storms create thoughts in your brain. There's no difference between nature's forces outside or inside. Very totally consistent with Eastern wisdom traditions. And with that as a basic understanding, I created this acronym, which is how do you rewire the nervous system to create literally the hardware in the brain for leadership. Learn and listen, look and listen inside. So we create something in our leaders called a soul profile. You know, Howard Gardner, who is one of the pioneers in leadership from Harvard Business School, you may be familiar with his name because he was the person who originally talked about multiple intelligence. So, you know, most people when they talk about intelligence, it's IQ. Well, we have musical intelligence, we have mathematical intelligence, we have body intelligence, we have spatial intelligence, we have creative intelligence, none of which is addressed in our educational systems whatsoever. Now, when I came here and Ming showed me around, I could see a lot of very interesting, playful creativity in this environment, whether it's the garden outside or, you know, your Google Maps or just the way things are placed here and decorated here. There's a lot of creative, playful energy here. And that is an extension of the consciousness here. You know, it's the collective creativity that is manifesting at that. So when you look inside your inner world and you ask yourself questions like, who am I? What do I want? What's my purpose? What kind of contribution do I want to make to my family, to the world, to the community? What are my unique skills and talents? How do I put them to use? What's really fun for me? What are peak experiences? What do I look for in a good friendship? What do I bring to a relationship? Who are my archetypes, my heroes, my heroines in history, in mythology, in religion? That kind of reflection starts a process in you that creates a vision automatically. And when we do it collectively, that vision can be very empowering. So based on a soul profile, then we create teams that are emotionally bonded, that limbically resonate with each other. And the limbic system resonating with limbic system. This is well-known phenomenon now, that when you look at teams that win, particularly sports teams, you know, when you see the Super Bowl or whatever, the teams are pretty close to each other as far as talent is concerned. What makes a team win is the emotional connection in the team. You know, do they have emotional intelligence? Are they free of toxic emotions like resentments, grievances? You know, as Nelson Mandela once said, holding a resentment is like drinking poison and hoping it'll kill your enemy. So how do you become emotionally free? How do you get in touch with your own feelings? How do you get in touch with the feelings of others? How do you resolve conflicts through creativity? Einstein once said, no problem can be solved at the level of consciousness at which the problem was created. You have to move to the next level of consciousness. So that brings us to expanding awareness and understanding both hierarchies of needs and hierarchies of responses. The midbrain acts just through fight-flight. The limbic brain can act through emotional dysfunction, reactivity. You know, the controlling and manipulating a situation either by being nice or being nasty or being indifferent or playing the victim. And we learn these habits very early in childhood. So when you're about 3 years of age and you're out shopping with your mother and you want a lollipop and she says, no, I'm not going to do that because you got one yesterday, what do? First thing you say is, you play nice. Mommy, I love you. I'll give you a kiss. Will you please buy me the lollipop? And if she doesn't, then the second thing, what do? You play nasty. You throw a tantrum. You lie down hoping to embarrass her. You still don't get the lollipop, then you go home and she can't find you. You're hiding in the closet and she says, aren't you going to come for lunch? And you say, leave me alone. You pout. You get stubborn, indifferent. And if that doesn't work, you finally go to your mother and you say, you play the victim. You're nice to my brothers and sisters. You're not nice to me. So by now she's fed up and she gives you the lollipop and your little brain says it works. And by the time we are 8 years of age, and this is, I'm not exaggerating, these are psychological studies, the average leader is an emotionally retarded male at the age of 8 years. Because the average leader reacts either from the midbrain or the dysfunctional limbic brain. If you can go beyond those two, you have what is called centered awareness, where you're present, where you're mindful. We have somebody here from Mindfulness Without Borders, where we're teaching, this nonprofit organization is going across the world, teaching people, young children, mindfulness, to be aware of the moment, to be aware of what's happening in their body, to be aware of their breath, to be aware of their environment, but also to be aware of their inner world, their feelings, their inner images, their thoughts, their ideas, and all so easy to teach. So when you have access to this and you go beyond fight, flight, and reactive responses, you stop being controlling and manipulative through being either nice or nasty or indifferent or stubborn or playing the victim, then you have access to higher states of consciousness. Intuition, which is a form of intelligence that is contextual, relational, holistic, nurturing, doesn't have a win-lose orientation, goes beyond cause-effect because it eavesdrops on context. And when you have context, then you have creativity. True creativity can never be programmed into a computer because there's no algorithm for creativity. Okay? True creativity comes from the discontinuity. It comes from your soul. And beyond creativity is eavesdropping on the higher mind, the bigger mind that is, in a way, correlating everything in the ecosystem. We are part of an ecosystem. The world is our extended body. And so when you see the contexts, the meanings, the relationships, the archetypal themes that run the bigger context, you have creativity, higher vision, a sense of mystery, sacredness, and then, only then, you can dare to dream and take action. So we start as human beings, then you become human feelings, then human thinkings, and finally human doings. But our world is totally the opposite. Everybody is doing, doing, doing. There's very little thinking. It's mostly about me. There's hardly any feeling, and it's mostly dysfunctional, and there's no being. So wisdom traditions say the highest state of human intelligence is being. Just being. The second highest state of human intelligence is the feeling that we call love and compassion. The third highest state of human intelligence is the thinking that is creative, that can create new meanings, new contexts, new relationships, and new themes. And the least intelligent state of being is doing. But finally, when you do it on the basis of being, feeling, thinking, what in Eastern traditions we call karma yoga. The right thing at the right time, process orientation and not outcome orientation. Empowerment, leaders know how to empower themselves and empower others. And we find that people who feel empowered, they have three major characteristics. One, they have great self-esteem. They don't confuse self-image with self-esteem. Self-image is what other people think of you. Self-esteem comes from a deeper level by asking the questions that I asked earlier. Great leaders have great self-esteem. They have values, they live up to their values, and they use their strengths. Now, as part of Gallup, as a senior scientist there, we actually all know what our strengths are. So for example, if you ask me, what are your strengths? I would say, I'm a futuristic person. I look into the future. I'm adaptable. I feel connected and I like to connect other people. I maximize the use of my energy and don't waste it. And I'm strategic. These are my 5 strengths. But when we work with teams, we identify everybody's strengths and then we create teams that complement each other's strengths. So when you have teams that complement each other's strengths, where everybody expresses their unique strength, you have powerful leadership. At Gallup, we also found out that if the people you work with, so if your manager, for example, your immediate superior, if he or she ignores you, your rate of disengagement goes up by 45%. 20% of the US workforce is not only disengaged, they're actively disengaged, which means they come to work unhappy and with the express purpose of making other people unhappy. Okay? That's 20%. There's another 45% that are disengaged. They come to work because they have to make a living. They punch in and they punch out. But they're not interested in what they're doing. Between the disengaged and the actively disengaged, the cost to the US economy is about $380 billion a year. If your supervisor or manager doesn't ignore you but criticizes you, your disengagement actually falls to 20%, which means your performance improves because you would rather be criticized than ignored. You don't exist when you're ignored. Now you're being criticized, you at least exist. On the other hand, if you're using your strengths and somebody acknowledges your strengths and notices your strengths and compliments your strength, your disengagement falls to less than 1%. So this has huge economic implications. Our career well-being. In the United States, more people die on Monday morning at 9 o'clock than any other time of heart attacks. This is an extraordinary accomplishment for which only the human species can take credit. There's no other animal that knows the difference between Monday and Tuesday. Okay? And so, career well-being is dependent on very simple things. Are you using your strengths? Do you have friends that you work with? Are you playful? Do you have a good time? Do you have self-esteem? And then, this career well-being is linked to social well-being. We found at Gallup, this not making up this data, if you have a happy friend, your happiness goes up by 15%. If your happy friend has a happy friend whom you don't know, it goes up by another 10%. If your happy friend's happy friend has a happy friend whom you don't know, it goes up another 10%. So, why is this? It's because consciousness is a field. It's a field, just like electricity is a field. Werner Heisenberg, one of the original developers of quantum physics, he said consciousness is a singular that has no plural. Just like the same electricity is coming through my BlackBerry and through your computer and through this light, a single consciousness is expressing itself through all the diversity of living organisms. And that's why when we want to connect, we feel love and compassion are the highest truths. We feel happy. So Google, the perfect place to create networks of global happiness, where people actually know how to make each other happy. And there's a lot of research on that. Again, from Gallup, you are happy when you find a creative solution, when you find meaning and purpose, when you make somebody else happy, when instead of a problem, you see an opportunity. So, we know all the science, the statistics behind it, and how happiness actually brings on neurochemistry of immunomodulation, your immune system, your endocrine system, your thoughts, your feelings, and your biology as an integrated network of energy and information, and your mind as that process. Your mind is a process that regulates the flow of energy and information, not only in your body, but in your relationships. So mind is an embodied and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information. And now the mind is entangled, because of the internet, because of technology, because of Google, we have an entangled mind. What's happening in Egypt is affecting us, and what's happening here is affecting people in Afghanistan. It's entangled both in space and in time, because through culture and through history And through religion and mythology, our mind is entangled with the past. It's entangled with the future. It's entangled with each other. When we begin to understand entanglement and the power of entanglement, we have the means to use technology for creative problem solving. Right now, if I were to say there are 4 problems in the world that really need to be addressed immediately, one is conflict, war, terrorism. The second is ecology, devastated ecology. The third is radical poverty, where you live in a world where 50% of people live on less than $2 a day, 20% on less than $1 a day. You can never have social justice and peace unless we address this. And the interesting thing is, we have the collective creativity, the collective intelligence to actually solve these problems. To me, technology now is the solution, combined with a higher consciousness that feels connected and responsible. Because action without love is meaningless, and love without action is totally irrelevant. But when you combine the two and you use technology and the understanding of entanglement, there's no problem that we cannot solve. And technology is also unstoppable. If you are following the growth of technology, you'll know that the capacity of technology is doubling every year. The internet became commercially available in 1995. We are in 2010, 15 years, and see where we are. I can go on a computer with my little gadgets and see how my friends across the world, how they're sleeping, how well they're sleeping, how well they're rested, what their cardiovascular system is, what their brain waves are doing, and we help each other to grow, to evolve, to heal, to self-regulate. And all the data shows that when we come together to do these things, we are enormously successful because we are empowering each other. We take responsibility then for calculated risks, taking initiative and solving problems and doing it playfully and creatively. And finally, we understand synchronicity. One of the persons to talk about synchronicity, when you examine the lives of great leaders, he said, tell me, how did you become so successful? And this work has been done by Porras and Collins and by others. Almost everybody says, I was lucky. Or they say, I happened to be in the right place at the right time. Or they say, if they're religious, they say God was on my side. Or it seemed a state of grace, or it was many coincidences. Well, Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist, and Wolfgang Pauli, the pioneer in quantum physics, they actually talked about synchronicity as a fundamental property in the universe, where at the most transcendent level, everything is happening all at once. There's no linearity in the universe. How does a human body, which has 100 trillion cells, each of them doing 100,000 activities per second, keep track of every other cell instantly? How does a human body think thoughts, play a piano, kill germs, remove toxins, make a baby instantly, all at the same time? These are mysteries that are yet to be solved. But I think we are moving to an era where we are going to understand non-local intelligence, transcendent intelligence, soul or spirit, as the primary activity of the universe that operates synchronistically. And when you extend your boundaries, when you take away your labels, if you take away every label you've given yourself, then you are an infinite consciousness. You're a field of possibilities. And you start to see the environment as an extension of yourself. This environment is very good, actually. It feels very good because you can see it's an extension of your collective psyche and your collective consciousness. So that, in a nutshell, is the basics of what I think the future of leadership should be. That consciously, we should create and rewire our nervous system so that through what is called long-term potentiation, we keep firing the neurons to wire the neurons to actually make leadership second nature to us. But true leadership, where we unfold our potential, we unfold the potential of others for greatness, and we use the principles of higher consciousness to heal ourselves and to heal the world. And no one is in a better position than you guys, because you're really laying down the neural networks of the planetary mind that is evolving right now. The planetary mind is evolving, and boundaries are breaking, whether they are national boundaries or ethnic boundaries or religious boundaries. They're going to break. It's unstoppable. And this is the divine manifesting through us as our technologies, a planetary mind. Thank you very much. Sure, we have about 10 minutes. So.
There's a microphone at the back. If you can step up to the microphone, that'd be fantastic.
Thank you for coming. I have a question. As I'm listening to you today, I'm bringing that to some of the events that I see going on in the world, and some of those are very hopeful. Obviously, what just happened in Egypt and what's happening through Middle East is a great example where this is coming together. But then as I think more locally to our nation and our leadership, I really see that going in a very bad direction, and the use of propaganda and technology and just poor leadership. I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
If you remember what I said in the beginning, the leader represents the collective consciousness, then we can't blame the leader. We are the creators of the leaders. So, in Mahatma Gandhi's words, can you be the change you want to see in the world? And, I am a very careful observer of what's happening in political leadership in Washington. For every congressman, there are 28 lobbyists. Just for health care, there are 14 lobbyists for every congressman. Special interest groups, military industrial complex, pharmaceutical companies, manufacturers of equipment. But I can tell you what's going to happen is, because of the new technologies, in a way the democratization of media is happening. The media right now is totally controlled by special interest groups. But as we begin to create our own media and democratize media, as we have television networks on the internet, if people create their own content, and if the content is good, reaches critical mass, you'll see a turn, but it'll take a while. It takes a generation to do this.
So I agree with you. Would you say we're kind of right now headed in the wrong direction and it'll turn around? Or do you actually just disagree with me and you think...
No, I think there's a lot of creativity at work, and as the creativity unleashes itself, the darkness also tries to keep up with it. And there's a time of what we call phase transition. Water comes to steam, that's a transition. There's a lot of boiling in the cauldron.
Well, thank you for your work. You're a positive force.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for coming. Here it is a great place, and I know we all very much enjoy working here, but at the same time, we're all extremely busy, and I think we often have very little time to even reflect on what consciousness is, or even attend talks like this. And I think most of us start early in the morning, run around to meetings all day, write code, and late at night, we're still thinking about our job and creating all this, goodness that we're doing here. But what's your advice for us to kind of sometimes break out of that mold, smell the roses, as you said?
I would say, and I can give you data to prove this, by the way, that from Gallup, where we gather this kind of data, that in an environment like this, which is very ambitious, but also very creative, take time to play during the day. Find time to get together, to be playful, to speak to each other, to exercise, to reflect, to meditate. Doesn't it take that much? Take a 20-minute break. Make it part of your policy. From what I know in Google, you guys participate in a lot of decision making, and you should do that. You should, get together as groups and create some rituals. Rituals of playfulness, rituals of reflection, rituals of exercise, rituals of mind-body stuff, whether it's Tai Chi or yoga or breathing techniques, and your productivity will go up. I mean, there's no question that productivity goes up. According to Gallup, we should be socializing 6 hours every day. And that includes at work, which means purposeless activity, playful activity.
But if you actually look at probably all of our calendars, they're just completely full all the time.
Change it. If there's any place where it can be changed, it's here.
All right, thank you.
Because you have a collective voice.
You talked about letting go of labels and just being. Can you give us some examples of how to do that? I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a friend, I'm an employee.
So you're a sister, you're a friend, you're a daughter, you work here. These are the many masks. These are the many roles that your spirit plays. So when you observe your different roles that you play, you recognize there's a part of you that is not the roles. It's taken on that role. In a day, I play many roles. I play the role of a doctor, of a teacher, of a writer, of a son or a father. But I have learned to reflect and watch myself. You know, the great Indian teacher Krishnamurti used to say the highest form of human intelligence is the ability to observe yourself without judging yourself. So the more you observe yourself without labeling yourself, the more you'll realize that actually you're a field of possibility at your fundamental core being. And these roles are great, and you should play them well. But if you get sucked into the melodrama of the role, then you lose your spirit.
Thank you.
And I have a question that comes from my mom. And my wonderful mom, this is her question. What's the best way to imagine what you want without ever having the experience of it?
Well, all imagination comes from some kind of memory, either personal or archetypal or collective. The best raw material for imagination is mythology, because mythology represents, you know, the word myth in English is related to the word mata or mother or matrika or matter or meter or time or measurement or music. These are all words that come from myth. So what's myth? It's the collective imagination of our ancestors that has lived through time. And when I was a little child, my mother would read to me stories from the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, because that was the imagination of the impossible. You know, the monkey god flying in the air with the Himalayas in his hands. It stretches your imagination. But read the Bible and you'll see it's archetypal. The myth, the stories of Moses or David or Goliath or Joshua, or read the Greek mythology, the Egyptian mythology. That's where the raw materials of our imagination exist. But now they're extending into outer space as well. Princess Leia, Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader. Yeah, so, you know, there is no other place to enrich your mythology than the stories of the collective mind.
Thank you.
Right, shall we end it here? So thank you, Dr. Chopra,
Thank you,
for
Gopi.
coming to Google and elevating our collective consciousness in a short time. And you heard his advice, please go out and socialize or play. Thank you.
Thank you.